Hello and welcome to the Tactical Pundit YouTube channel. My name is Yash Mahatma and I'm going to be talking to you today about the Manchester City versus Arsenal game, going into the tactical details of the affair. Now, before we start, I just want to take a few seconds to say thank you for all the support I've been getting. I do really appreciate it. Hopefully it's onwards and upwards for here. But for now, let's get straight into it with the team lineup. So on this side we've got Manchester City in blue, this side is Arsenal in red. Now they started off with goalkeeper Ederson, Benjamin Mendy, Laporte, Garcia, Kyle Walker. In the midfield as a sole pivot was Ilkay Gundogan. Ahead of him were the two attacking midfielders, Kevin De Bruyne and David Silva. On the right wing was Riyad Mahrez, in the middle Gabriel Jesus, and on the left wing Raheem Sterling. Now for the Gunners, it was a different lineup to what they'd usually see. A lot of big names were left out of there, and it's switching formation as well. Having usually played what would be a 4-2-3-1, this formation here doesn't seem too far apart, but what's key is the way the midfield actually acts in this game, and that's what separates a normal 4-2-3-1 to this formation, which is a 4-3-3, but with a two-man pivot. In goal was Leno, left back Kieran Tierney making a start, left centre back we had Pablo Mari, Mustafi, Hector Bellerin. In the midfield we had Granit Xhaka starting off the game, Guendouzi to his right, and up ahead as the sole cam was Joe Willock. On the left wing was Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, in the middle Eddie Nketiah, and on the right was Bukayo Saka, who's usually been played a lot at left back this season, is a natural winger on the left but has played on the right wing too. So, what do we usually expect when we come to these teams? The first thing we expect City to do is to actually start playing in a formation like this. A 2-3-5. Now these two fullbacks are inverted fullbacks in Kyle Walker and Benjamin Mendy, who support the middle pivot in Ilkay Gundogan. What you'll also notice here is the way that Pep Guardiola envisions his pitch. He likes to have two players in every strip in the pitch, and he likes to have three players going across at a maximum. So it gives a great numerical stability to him, both horizontally and vertically. But instead we saw something different. What actually happened was we saw Kevin De Bruyne sit alongside Ilkay Gundogan with David Silva just ahead of him. You could say matching Arsenal's midfield, but there was a reason as to why Kevin De Bruyne specifically was here, and we'll get onto that in a second. In terms of how Arsenal were attacking, they kept their fullbacks high and wide. Centre backs slightly wider than the two midfielders in between, but not as wide as we've seen them before. Joe Willock would support the attack up front, and Eddie Nketiah had a key role in this team. So let's start off with Arsenal's pressing game. Now the reason we're starting off with Arsenal's press is because they were the ones who got off the foot better, they had a sharper start, more aggressive, and this is how they did it. Manchester City, as we know, played a 4-3-3, but Kevin De Bruyne did sit alongside Ilkay Gundogan. Now Kevin De Bruyne didn't necessarily just stay towards wherever Gundogan was, but he ended up slightly following him. Effectively he would follow the ball. The reason as to why he did this we'll come back to later. Arsenal were pressing like this. So they had their three wingers, which was then supported by a man marking system in the midfield. So as we can see here, the two centre backs, the two full backs, and this is how City were playing. Now what Arsenal were trying to do consistently is not only were they looking at each midfielder, so we've got one pairing here, one pairing here, and one pairing here, but more necessarily, Aubameyang actually started by blocking off this passing lane, and he was getting ready to pounce on Kyle Walker. So that way, instead of actually going to attack the centre backs, they were trying to cut out passes going towards the midfield. Now immediately, it's not exactly something they would have expected, because rather than City having one pivot, as I mentioned before, Kevin De Bruyne was there too. So if the ball was on this side of the pitch, what would actually happen is the ball would go over to Kyle Walker, which would then double up, and the press was there, which meant that a covering midfielder in Granit Xhaka would have to cover. But at the same time, not only did it leave room for Gundogan, but De Bruyne would follow him, and the reason being is, as it got congested on that side, The space was on the other side of the pitch, over here. And Kevin De Bruyne's job constantly was to switch that ball. So in terms of City's passing pattern during this game, what we did end up seeing was something that looked a little bit like this. Now we've got the striker, the wingers, the three midfielders. Kevin De Bruyne is here. Ederson would push up slightly. The Arsenal attackers were waiting, so the ball would go inside first, come back out, which would draw Aubameyang slightly. Then it would go out onto the wing. Now, as Aubameyang would go over, Kieran Tierney would move on to block that pass off. As the ball went out wide, the ball was given back to Gundogan, and De Bruyne would be in close range, because as soon as it went to De Bruyne, that ball was switched where the space was, and the entire team would then have to reshuffle and move over. Now, let's talk about Arsenal's passing patterns. So, if we was to reset the pitch here, this is what it would look like. City's press was a lot more aggressive compared to Arsenal's. And so this is how it would happen. Now, constantly, these 6 players here are one of the most key players to the press alongside the fullbacks. Everyone has a role. First of all, the backline pushes up. The second thing is, as soon as it gets to these 2 centre-backs, Sterling and Mahrez are on the outside within a couple yards of each marker. Initially, Arsenal didn't even start with a double pivot when it came to building from the back. They actually started with a single pivot. So Arsenal were trying to be more confident in this case. However, because of how much easier it was to shut down these passing lanes, as soon as the ball went to the centre-back, they all pushed up. And that's the key thing here. They all did. It wasn't just one person goes and then there's a duration of amount of time in the time that it would take for Mahrez to press. They would do it at the same time, to the point where that option was not even a possibility, and it goes straight back to the goalkeeper. So not only did they have the fullbacks marked, the midfielders on the inside were also pretty well marked. So what Arsenal did end up doing was they ended up dropping 2. Now if we just have a look here at the positioning of the team here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fullbacks were slightly higher, and so you had a cocoon going on here covering the 2 midfielders. But what it did mean is, once it was here, this Arsenal midfielder is left one-on-one with his midfielder. The fullbacks are higher than City's players, and so if they did get the ball in the right position, they could attack, and it could be devastating. And the passing pattern that occurred here, there were 2 types. The first one was it would go to centre-back, back to the keeper, back to the centre-back. The fullback would drop, and if he could quick enough, it was this pass that was played in field, because now not only has he got one person pressing him, he's got a winger trying to press him, a striker is trying to close him down, and as they're trying to close down this option here, that pass is open. And that pass is played across. Aubameyang is consistently making the run between Garcia and Kyle Walker, and that was the idea that was going on. Now, one thing that we saw in the training videos with Arsenal as well was that there was 1-2 routines going on with Aubameyang where he'd pass it back inside, run on, and then receive it. We only saw that happen once. There was one time when Kieran Tierney was in a passing position and he could have played it to Aubameyang, who had made a perfect run because of how deep Kyle Walker was. He had caught him out. But unfortunately, the ball never came. And they did learn from that. City did learn from this, and I'll go on to explain what happened later. But the other passing situation that Arsenal did create was this one here. The other option Arsenal had trialled against Brentford was to use a target man and get in behind. Now this is what they did. City were very good at blocking down these passing options. So what they did in the end was draw them in, like so, have the ball here, and it was in this space of the pitch, where the ball would go up top to Eddie Nketiah, who was much stronger than Garcia throughout the game, and as soon as he won that ball, the fullbacks were already high. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because Willock was already one step ahead to constantly receive that ball. And that is when you could get at the four defenders of Manchester City, and that's when you can hurt them. If you can get in behind this front six that presses so well alongside the fullbacks, when you get into this area, that's when you can hurt them. And those were the kind of chances Arsenal were creating in the first 15 to 20 minutes. That's why these runs from Aubameyang were consistently happening, because they were constantly getting into this situation. Now, Arsenal only had 32% possession over the entire game compared to City. And there is a reason for that. Not only is it due to the press, but it's also as to how committed they were in the press in terms of how high up the pitch they were playing. When it came to City pressing Arsenal, although our fullbacks were high, what we did see was City's fullbacks pressing to such an extent that Arsenal weren't even able to get out of their own half. At times, especially in the second half, they were pressing a lot deeper. Now, it does leave the great option for Aubameyang to run in behind. But the problem is, Arsenal weren't confident enough to make this type of pass, or to make this type of pass before the centre-back cuts it out. Consistently, City were always doing that. If we was to take it back to how City were playing in their build-up, a key thing when you're trying to be an attacking-based team, possession-based team, is that you pass with a quick tempo and you're confident with it. And this is what was going on over here. Arsenal weren't making those passes, but City were. Every time Kevin De Bruyne or David Silva or Kevin De Bruyne, they would drop, receive that ball, play it back and turn into this space. This space that they had here with those little 1-2s to get in combinations with the fullback and then attack. They consistently did that so well. Even high up the pitch, when Arsenal were in their own half, consistently we saw this situation go on as they defended in a tight block unit. Every time front three men were against the back four, joined by the two midfielders. When City did have the ball, they did progress in the way we would have thought them to, in this 2-3-5 formation. But the difference is when it got to one of these players, every time a quick run, pass it, pull him out, space. Quick 1-2, attack the space. Pep Guardiola once said, the objective is to move the opposition, not the ball. And that's exactly what he means here. Now, the first goal came about from a consistent run that was being made by Raheem Sterling and Riyad Mahrez. When Arsenal defended, the two wingers would actually double up along here. Now, the fullbacks were able to distract the wingers. Kyle Walker started coming a lot more inverted to stop that run from happening. But at the same time, he was bringing Aubameyang closer inwards to the pitch. And when Mahrez did move out to the flank, not only did he take Tierney with him, but it opened this space up. And this space was then exploited by Jesus, who would start taking the centre-back with him. And that is when Raheem Sterling would attack that space there. The first time he got there, it was cut out. But the second time, David Luiz has misjudged the ball, and it fell through to Raheem Sterling, who scored 1-0. They consistently exploited the gap between the centre-back and the full-back. And it's another thing that Pep likes to do is not necessarily every time a player is moving, it's because they want to receive the ball. Players can do this because you're trying to get other players out of a position, because you want to create spaces for your other teammates. Now, keeping with the idea of attacking the space between the centre-backs and the full-backs, in the second half in particular, that's something City did very, very well. And it's something that changed the game for them consistently, because Arsenal in the second half were a lot more pinned into their own half. Although they were man-marking, what it also meant is because they were man-marking what would usually be this 5-man attack, they were sitting so deep that at times they had a back line of this many players, to the point where there was only at times Two players consistently shifting over, all inside a 10 to 15 yard gap between the defensive line and the striker. Now what was going on consistently is City were not only pinning them back, as we said before, but the other thing that was going on is they were making the pitch wider, and they were hurting Arsenal because of how many players they had back in one defensive line. So if we were to take a look at the wingers, for example, here and here, they would drift out very wide. These guys are trying to stay compact. So when Bellerin follows, the midfielder is here. Kevin De Bruyne would stay here. Bernardo Silva would stay there. So the two Arsenal covering midfielders, who in Ceballos, because Xhaka did go off injured, and Guendouzi, they would stay close where either this run could happen because no one would cover it. The centre-back would stay here because Jesus could make this run. There was no Arsenal player willing to cover this gap. And it was the same on the other side. No Arsenal player was willing to cover this gap. Now, because we were doubling up on the flanks, it meant it was harder. So as we did shift over, we were trying to stop those passes into Jesus and the other midfielder to the point where this run could be made or that run could be made. And that's what happened with Riyad Mahrez. When the ball was won in a tight position higher up the pitch and Tierney was out, David Luiz was trying to hold the line. So Kieran Tierney was here, Aubameyang was here, David Luiz was here, here was Riyad Mahrez. Now when that ball had come in to Mahrez, his first touch and first instinctiveness was to attack this gap. And because the rest of the Arsenal defence is so much more further forward, David Luiz wasn't able to hold the line, and so he got exploited, and he conceded that penalty that led to their second goal. This was only made harder when Arsenal went down to 10 men. When David Luiz was sent off, Arsenal ended up reverting to a 4-4-1 system. It revolved around Kieran Tierney playing left centre-back, Bukayo Saka switched back to left-back, Aubameyang stayed left mid, Ceballos Guendouzi ahead of him, and on the right side was Joe Willock, and ahead of him was Eddie Nketiah. At the peak, it ended up with Lacazette being ahead, Aubameyang, Ceballos, Maitland-Niles, Reece Nelson. The defence stayed the same. But what it also meant was City went from committing 5 players forward to committing 6, with Kyle Walker usually getting in on the attacks. When I say getting in, it was purely and simply because of how pinned back Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang was in this game. The other thing was a supportive midfielder would then come up and they would play. The thing that Arsenal would have learnt from this is how well City closed down passing lanes. There was a time when there was a corner to City, and the two players on the outside were the two fullbacks. The idea is, and it's something that they did against Liverpool last season as well, is that if they're here and they break, that ball straight towards the middle is going to hurt. Which is why if you keep them close, it creates this ball. And when the ball is closer to the flank, you can push them out to the flank. Aubameyang consistently was pushed out wide whenever he was further up the pitch. And it's another feature of City's play. For example, both teams did do this. And it was the idea that when you do have the ball, you stay quite close together, particularly for Arsenal. Usually we're used to seeing full-backs, not only just way up here, but centre-backs directly on the edge of the box. Not in this game. The centre-back stayed close because in the event that it gets turned over, this gap is a lot bigger compared to that gap. The other thing is you can make short, quicker passes, which is what Pep likes. Pep liked to have these short, quick passes, which is why when they did it pass to the midfielders, they didn't necessarily always pass like that. The midfielders dropped and made it a safer passing option. Kyle Walker stayed tucked in so that if they do lose the ball, that gap is not as big as that gap. That was Manchester City versus Arsenal. There were a few tactics from the game. Please do like the video and let me know down in the comments what you thought of it. Turn on post notifications and subscribe to the Tactical Pundit YouTube channel. There's going to be a lot of great content from a lot of great teams coming along in the next few weeks. Do stay tuned. My name is Yash Mahatma. I am the Tactical Pundit. See you next time.